In 1945, safety technology was nearly non-existent. Steel dashboards, rigid steering columns, poor braking systems, and structural weaknesses made even low-speed collisions deadly. Add in slippery bias-ply tires and massive blind spots, and these cars became rolling hazards in an America just learning to drive again. These are the 11 most dangerous American cars from around 1945. Cars that helped move a nation forward, but too often took lives in the process.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. The 1945 Ford Super Deluxe occupies a strange place in automotive history. It wasn't exactly new. Ford had halted most civilian car production during World War II, and when civilian models resumed in 1945, they were essentially rehashed pre-war designs. The Super Deluxe was a continuation of the 1942 model, and as such, it rolled into a post-war America without any updates to safety, handling, or modern braking technology. In this lecture, we'll dissect the design, limitations, and hazards of the 1945 Ford Super Deluxe, a vehicle that looked stylish but handled like a brick on stilts and left drivers terrifyingly exposed in emergencies. The Super Deluxe was Ford's upscale trim level offered on sedans, coupes, and convertibles. With chrome accents and generous interiors, it appealed to families and servicemen returning from war. But behind the shiny grille and Art Deco styling lurked a fundamentally outdated car, and one whose flaws could become fatal under stress. Carried over from 1941 to 42, suspension rigid front axle with leaf springs, brakes outdated hydraulic drum brakes, no safety belts, no crumple zones, no reinforced roof. By 1945, hydraulic brakes were standard, but Ford's version was basic and prone to failure in demanding situations. The car used drum brakes on all four wheels, with no power assist. In stop-and-go traffic or downhill runs, brake fade was a serious risk, as heat buildup reduced effectiveness rapidly. The system lacked proper sealing, so braking performance degraded in the rain. Stopping distances were long, inconsistent, and dangerous at highway speeds. The Super Deluxe rode on a ladder-type steel frame, which was known for durability but not flexibility. The frame transmitted impact forces directly to the cabin with no energy-dissipating structures. Even low-speed collisions could seriously injure occupants, as the cabin was effectively a steel box with no give. A steel dashboard and uncollapsible steering column meant drivers could be impaled or severely injured in frontal impacts. Instruments and knobs were made of metal and lacked padding of any kind. One of the Super Deluxe's most underappreciated dangers was its tall stance, especially in wagons and convertibles. The car's wheelbase and track width weren't wide enough to balance its tall roof and heavy doors. In emergency swerves or evasive moves, body lean was excessive, often causing loss of control or rollover. The front suspension used a transverse leaf spring, a dated design from the 1930s. This setup did not respond well to sudden weight transfers, making sharp turns unpredictable and potentially disastrous. The 1945 Super Deluxe had no meaningful safety equipment, even by the modest standards of the time. Seatbelts? None, not even as options. Safety glass? Present on the windshield, but not always standard on side windows. Roof strength? Minimal. A rollover could easily collapse the structure. Door latches? Weak. Doors could pop open in side impacts or during rollovers. In the 1940s, driving was statistically far more dangerous than it is today, and the Super Deluxe played a role in that danger. Rollover accidents were not uncommon for rural drivers who had to swerve to avoid obstacles. Braking failures led to rear-end collisions and inability to stop on hills. The rigid body often meant crash energy was transferred directly to passengers, amplifying injuries. Its style and price made it popular, but that popularity masked a deep flaw. Ford was selling a pre-war car in a world that was rapidly changing. The 1945 Ford Super Deluxe may have been a patriotic and familiar sight on American roads, but it was a car unfit for the post-war boom in speed, traffic, and mobility. With inadequate braking, primitive suspension, and absolutely no crash safety, the Super Deluxe represents a chapter in automotive history where style won out over survival. Number 9. When the 1945 Chevrolet Fleetmaster hit the market, America was still celebrating the end of World War II. Consumers were starved for new cars after years of rationing and halted production, and automakers like GM were desperate to deliver. But what they delivered in the Fleetmaster was not innovation. It was a repackaged 1941 design with a few cosmetic tweaks. This lecture explores how the 1945 Chevrolet Fleetmaster embodied everything wrong with post-war automotive safety: outdated engineering, dangerous braking systems, and a complete lack of crash protection in an era of growing speeds and traffic. In 1945, Chevrolet resumed civilian car production with the Fleetmaster, but make no mistake, this wasn't a new car. It was based almost entirely on pre-war engineering and tooling. Same chassis, same engine, same suspension as the 1942 model. Style and comfort were emphasized to draw in returning soldiers and families. But under the surface, it was obsolete the day it rolled off the assembly line. The Fleetmaster used a ladder frame chassis, which provided durability but no energy absorption in a crash. In a frontal impact, the rigid steel frame would transmit the force directly into the passenger cabin. The concept of crumple zones hadn't yet been introduced. As a result, collisions at even moderate speeds could be fatal, with occupants suffering blunt force trauma from the unforgiving structure. The dashboard was solid steel, often with chrome knobs and edges. There was no padded surface, and the steering column was a solid spear aimed directly at the driver's chest. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the 1945 Fleetmaster was its outdated braking technology. Unlike more modern hydraulic systems, the Fleetmaster retained mechanical linkages that controlled the brakes. These systems were inconsistent, requiring manual adjustment and frequent maintenance. Repeated braking, especially on hills or in traffic, would cause heat buildup and severe brake fade. Many drivers found that the car's stopping distance would dramatically increase without warning. Despite its weight, the Fleetmaster was not equipped to handle sudden maneuvers. The suspension was a basic leaf spring setup, inherited from pre-war designs. While sturdy, it allowed for significant body roll and poor road feedback, especially in turns. The car had manual steering with excessive play, meaning the driver had to constantly correct and guess during cornering or avoidance maneuvers. In an era before even lap belts were common, the Fleetmaster was a death trap in a crash, not even offered as an option. Occupants were thrown into dashboards, windshields, or out of the car entirely. Side impacts could easily force doors open, or worse, collapse the thin roof pillars, leading to cabin intrusion and rollovers. Safety glass was inconsistently applied. In some cases, side or rear glass could shatter into dangerous shards on impact. Despite its pleasant styling and popularity with returning GIs, the Fleetmaster proved dangerous. Frontal crashes often resulted in fatalities, as the rigid frame and dashboard became weapons. Braking failures were not uncommon, especially in mountainous or hilly terrain. The lack of any meaningful restraint systems made even low-speed crashes traumatic. The 1945 Chevrolet Fleetmaster is a perfect example of a car rushed to market with no regard for safety innovation. Built on old designs, it showcased none of the emerging crash science or braking advancements that the 1950s would slowly bring. While it met the nation's demand for personal transportation, it came at a price: a beautiful, nostalgic, but mechanically and structurally dangerous machine, entirely out of its time. Number 8. In the immediate post-war era, Americans were eager for sophistication and prestige. The 1945 Packard Clipper 6, with its sleek fastback styling and high-end reputation, seemed to deliver just that. But behind its elegant exterior was a vehicle that struggled with fundamental performance and safety limitations. Though marketed as a refined luxury sedan, the Clipper 6 offered poor handling, weak braking, and dangerously soft suspension tuning, all of which made it a risky proposition on America's rapidly modernizing roads. Like most 1945 models, the Clipper 6 was not a new car. It was essentially a continuation of the 1942 Packard Clipper, with production having resumed after the war. Packard, once a symbol of American automotive excellence, was already facing engineering stagnation. The Clipper nameplate aimed to blend modern design with pre-war mechanicals, but its safety and performance fell short of expectations. The Clipper 6 was the entry-level model in Packard's post-war lineup. It featured a 245 cubic inch inline six producing modest power. Not problematic in itself, but it was tied to a heavy body and outdated chassis. To achieve a luxury ride, the Clipper 6 was fitted with an extremely soft spring and damper setup. This resulted in significant body roll, especially during cornering, lane changes, or evasive maneuvers. The car wallowed in turns, making it feel unstable at higher speeds, especially on winding or uneven roads. The large front end and long wheelbase added to front heaviness, which further exaggerated understeer and delayed steering response. The lack of sway bars or modern shock control meant momentum could overwhelm the car's handling limits quickly. At highway speeds, the car could float excessively due to weak damping. Emergency maneuvers often led to loss of control or tire breakaway. The Clipper 6 used four-wheel mechanical drum brakes, which were standard at the time, but already showing their limits. On long descents or in city traffic, the brakes were prone to overheating and fading. Brake fade meant that stopping distances grew dramatically after repeated use. Braking required significant effort from the driver, and pedal travel was long and vague, leading to poor modulation and reduced confidence behind the wheel. While it looked substantial, the Clipper had no crash engineering. In frontal or side impacts, occupants were at the mercy of a solid steel dashboard, non-collapsible steering column, and thin door structures. The cabin featured hard, decorative trim, chrome knobs, and metal protrusions that could turn lethal in a crash. There were no seat belts, no padded surfaces, and no efforts to protect occupants during rollover or impact. The Packard Clipper 6's problems were not theoretical. They manifested in real-life situations. Cornering on rural roads could induce dangerous body sway, even at modest speeds. Braking under pressure led to fade, particularly when descending steep hills or in stop-and-go traffic. Its slow steering and floaty suspension meant avoidance maneuvers were nearly impossible without losing control. For families expecting safety from a large luxury vehicle, the Clipper 6 delivered style without substance. The 1945 Packard Clipper 6 stands as a cautionary tale in the history of automotive design. It was luxurious, yes, but in form, not function. It prioritized ride comfort and elegance over driver control and occupant safety. By clinging to pre-war engineering in a rapidly evolving post-war world, Packard inadvertently offered a vehicle ill-suited to the demands of modern traffic and road safety. The Clipper 6 was too soft, too vague, and ultimately too risky, despite its well-tailored facade. Number 7. The 1945 Lincoln Zephyr, like many post-war vehicles, was a continuation of a pre-war design with little advancement in safety or performance. As a luxury car, it represented prestige and elegance. But underneath its refined looks lay a series of serious mechanical and structural flaws. Though praised for its Art Deco curves and streamlined fastback silhouette, the Zephyr was nose-heavy, under-braked, and dangerously unstable at speeds above a city cruise. This lecture explores how Lincoln's premier offering failed to evolve in an era when performance was rising, but safety had yet to catch up. Introduced in 1936, the Lincoln Zephyr was meant to bridge the gap between Ford's mid-range offerings and the exclusive Lincoln K Series. By 1945, the Zephyr had largely retained its 1942 design, with minimal updates due to the interruption of World War II. Civilian auto production resumed slowly after the war, and most 1945 cars were essentially leftovers, with new trim and minor mechanical revisions. The Zephyr was no exception. It looked sleek but hid outdated engineering beneath its elegant sheet metal. The 1945 Zephyr used a Lincoln L-head V12, a unique selling point, but one that introduced excessive front-end weight. The V12's smoothness came at the cost of balance and handling, as it created a heavily nose-weighted chassis. The car's long front overhang, coupled with its hefty engine, made the Zephyr understeer heavily, particularly dangerous in wet or gravel conditions. Sudden steering inputs often failed to change the car's direction meaningfully, resulting in delayed response or sliding. The Zephyr's weight demanded better brakes, but it was equipped with four-wheel drum brakes that struggled under stress. Repeated stops led to brake fade, especially in downhill driving or stop-and-go traffic. Brake testing and period road tests revealed stopping distances well beyond safe standards, even for the time. This compromised the Zephyr's ability to avoid obstacles or react to sudden changes in traffic conditions. The Zephyr had a suspension tuned for comfort, not control. It absorbed bumps well, but at the cost of significant body roll during turns. Combined with its front-heavy balance, this made emergency maneuvers dangerous, especially at speeds over 45 miles per hour. On highways, the Zephyr's soft suspension and poor aerodynamics created floaty, unpredictable behavior. Crosswinds and uneven pavement could destabilize the car, particularly in sudden lane changes. The 1945 Zephyr lacked seatbelts, padded dashboards, collapsible steering columns, or safety glass throughout the cabin. The heavy all-steel body offered zero crumple zones, turning collisions into catastrophic events for occupants. The interior was trimmed in metal and featured chrome levers, knobs, and hard surfaces that became dangerous projectiles in a crash. Like many luxury cars of its time, the Zephyr prioritized appearance over occupant safety. While the 1945 Lincoln Zephyr looked sophisticated and delivered smooth city cruising, it was a deeply flawed vehicle by today's standards, and even by the 1940s emerging expectations of the post-war era. Its V12 engine contributed to instability, not performance, while its inadequate brakes and poorly tuned suspension made high-speed driving risky. Combined with its complete lack of crash protection or interior safety features, the Zephyr was a dangerous contradiction, a luxury car that fell dangerously short when it came to protecting those inside. The 1945 Lincoln Zephyr stands as a reminder that elegance cannot replace engineering, and that luxury without safety is a dangerous illusion. As America entered the automotive boom of the late 1940s and 50s, the Zephyr represented a final echo of a pre-safety era, clinging to outdated values in a changing world. Number 6. The 1945 Nash 600 occupies a unique place in American automotive history. It was a pioneer, the first American car to feature a unitized unibody construction, and was praised for its aerodynamic styling and exceptional fuel efficiency. However, this innovative design came with serious trade-offs. While Nash broke away from the traditional body-on-frame construction, it did so without developing structural crash protection to match. This lecture explores the dual legacy of the 1945 Nash 600, its bold leap into modern manufacturing methods, and its deeply flawed performance in crash safety, especially during an era when vehicle survivability and accidents was still poorly understood. After World War II, American automakers scrambled to resume civilian car production. Like most, Nash reintroduced pre-war designs with minimal mechanical updates. The 600 name referred to the car's ability to travel 600 miles on one tank of gas, a nod to its remarkable efficiency. The Nash 600's unitized body integrated the frame and body shell into a single welded structure. This reduced weight and increased fuel economy, but came at the expense of structural rigidity and crash durability. The Nash 600 weighed around 2,600 pounds, light for a full-size car of its day. While this made it efficient and nimble, it also made the car susceptible to deformation in crashes, especially at higher speeds or in side impacts. Early unibody designs lacked today's reinforced pillars, side beams, or crumple zones. In a serious accident, the car could collapse inward, transferring the energy directly into the cabin, endangering passengers rather than protecting them. Like most 1940s vehicles, the Nash 600 came without seatbelts, padded dashboards, or safety glass on all windows. Door latches were simple mechanical units prone to failure and accidents. Doors could easily fly open, ejecting occupants. Real-world crash anecdotes and retrospective safety assessments showed the Nash 600's body could crumple like an accordion, offering little survival space in head-on or side collisions. Despite the promise of structural rigidity, the early unit body was too lightly built to perform well in anything beyond low-speed impacts. Powered by a 172 cubic inch inline-six engine, The 600 was no speedster, but that didn't mean it was safe. It used four-wheel mechanical drum brakes, which were prone to fading and poor performance in emergency stops. The suspension favored comfort over control. Coupled with narrow tires, this made cornering unpredictable, especially on gravel or wet roads. While accidents were less likely due to its modest performance, avoidance capabilities were still poor. Nash's advertising often highlighted the one-piece body, suggesting greater strength and rigidity. But without internal reinforcements or crash management design, the unibody in 1945 provided less actual protection than a traditional frame under high-impact conditions. Later unitized cars would incorporate boxed sills, stronger roof rails, and crush zones, none of which were present in the Nash 600. In fact, minor crashes could result in twisted chassis alignment, rendering the car difficult to repair. The 1945 Nash 600 was an engineering trailblazer that pushed the American auto industry toward unibody construction, a technology that would later become standard. However, Nash adopted this innovation before safety science caught up. In doing so, the company delivered a car that was light, economical, and advanced, but dangerously fragile. Its poor resistance to structural collapse, combined with minimal passive safety equipment, made it no safer than older body-on-frame vehicles, and in some ways even more dangerous. The Nash 600's legacy teaches us that innovation without a safety framework can lead to dangerous outcomes. While it was ahead of its time in construction, it was well behind in understanding how to protect its occupants. Today's cars benefit from decades of safety engineering layered onto the unibody concept. The Nash 600, for all its achievements, was a first step on that road, but a deeply flawed one. Number 5. The 1945 Kaiser Special stands out as one of the first all-new American cars introduced after World War II. It symbolized hope, innovation, and a fresh start for the domestic auto industry. However, beneath its sleek design and progressive marketing was a vehicle that struggled with stability, safety, and structural robustness. In this lecture, we'll examine how the 1945 Kaiser Special's lightweight construction, rudimentary suspension, and aerodynamic vulnerabilities made it unpredictable and, at times, hazardous, especially at higher speeds or in adverse conditions like crosswinds. Formed by industrialist Henry J. Kaiser and auto executive Joseph Fraser, Kaiser Fraser was a bold new company aiming to challenge Detroit's Big Three. The 1945 Kaiser Special was introduced as a fresh design, not a warmed-over pre-war model. This made it highly appealing to returning soldiers and families hungry for something new. With sleek lines and modern proportions, the car looked ahead to the 1950s. Lightweight materials and a modest powertrain were chosen for affordability and efficiency, not for performance or structural durability. The car's body used relatively thin steel, saving weight but reducing its ability to withstand impacts. In crashes, panels could crumple easily, especially in frontal or side collisions. Structural reinforcements, such as inner door bracing or roof supports, were minimal or absent. As a result, the car performed poorly in rollover or T-bone scenarios, offering limited protection to occupants. Though the Kaiser Special was new in styling, its suspension technology was conservative, relying on basic coil springs and leaf rear springs. It lacked any sort of anti-roll stabilization or tune damping, resulting in a floaty, disconnected ride. At highway speeds, especially those above 50 miles per hour, the car's vague steering and soft suspension produced unpredictable body movement. Cornering introduced severe body roll, and emergency maneuvers could unsettle the vehicle dangerously, especially when loaded with passengers or cargo. The Kaiser Special featured a relatively tall roofline and long overhangs, which gave it a high center of gravity. This made it vulnerable to crosswinds, especially on bridges or open roads, where the car could drift unpredictably. The lightweight design led to poor rear-end traction, particularly in windy or slippery conditions. At highway speeds, a sudden gust could push the car sideways, a serious danger in an era before stability control or even effective power steering. Like most vehicles of its era, the 1945 Kaiser Special lacked seat belts, safety glass on all windows, or padded dashboards. Door latches and hinges were basic and prone to failure in side impacts, risking ejection or crushing injuries. The unibody-style construction was not designed with crumple zones or energy absorption in mind. In high-speed collisions, the energy of impact would often transfer directly to the passenger cabin, compounding injuries. The Kaiser Special relied on four-wheel drum brakes, which were susceptible to fade after repeated use and inconsistent in wet conditions. The stopping distance was long, and the pedal feel was vague, making it difficult to react quickly in emergencies. The steering system had significant slack and lacked road feel, important for anticipating how the vehicle would respond at speed. Combined with suspension flaws, the result was an unpredictable ride and a lack of driver confidence. The 1945 Kaiser Special deserves credit for breaking the mold during a pivotal moment in American automotive history. It was an ambitious project from an upstart brand, offering Americans something new in a sea of recycled pre-war models. But that ambition outpaced its engineering. In its quest for lightness, modernity, and affordability, Kaiser produced a car that looked good but drove dangerously under the wrong conditions. Its unpredictable handling, poor structural safety, and instability in crosswinds made it ill-suited for anything beyond cautious city driving. The 1945 Kaiser Special illustrates the growing pains of post-war innovation. While it hinted at the sleek, streamlined cars of the future, it lacked the mechanical and safety refinement needed to match its bold appearance. In many ways, it serves as a cautionary tale. Progress isn't just about appearances, it's about protecting people too. Number 4. The 1945 Plymouth Deluxe was a familiar sight to American families coming out of World War II. It offered a sense of normalcy, durability, and reliability, but at a significant cost when it came to passenger safety. Though it was praised for its mechanical dependability, the Deluxe was built on a pre-war platform, carrying over outdated engineering, crude suspension, and nearly non-existent crash protection. This lecture will examine how the Plymouth Deluxe, while popular and trusted, was a prime example of how reliable didn't mean safe in the 1940s. The 1945 Plymouth Deluxe was essentially a 1942 model resumed due to wartime production halts. Civilian car production had been frozen during World War II, and when it resumed in mid to late 1945, automakers rushed vehicles back to market with little to no design revisions. Plymouth had a strong reputation for durable engines and value, especially during the Great Depression. Consumers prioritized availability and familiarity, not safety, after years of rationing and shortages. The body panels were made from thin-gauge steel, sufficient to enclose passengers, but offering minimal energy absorption in a crash. There were no reinforced doors or side impact protections, leaving occupants vulnerable in T-bone collisions. Like most cars of its era, the Deluxe used a body-on-frame platform, which was rigid but transferred crash forces directly to the cabin. Without engineered crumple zones, the passenger compartment acted like a rigid box, amplifying injuries in frontal crashes. The Deluxe had a relatively tall body with a narrow track width, making it more prone to tipping during sharp turns or evasive maneuvers. Roof pillars were thin and lacked reinforcement, meaning a rollover could easily crush the cabin. In rural areas or during blowouts, rollovers were not uncommon and often fatal in a car like this. The suspension relied on leaf springs and basic shock absorbers, offering durability but little compliance over rough roads. Occupants were subjected to harsh vertical movement, which affected handling and contributed to driver fatigue. Body roll was excessive, and the lack of sway bars or modern damping meant the car leaned dangerously in curves. Combined with narrow bias ply tires, this made emergency maneuvers risky. The Deluxe still featured mechanical, not hydraulic brakes on early models, which were inconsistent and faded quickly during repeated use. Brake pedal effort was high, and stopping distances were long by modern standards. The steering had significant play, especially as components aged. In critical moments, drivers often had to overcorrect, worsening loss of control situations. The cabin had no seat belts, no head restraints, and hard metal dashboards. In a crash, even a minor one, passengers were thrown around violently, often hitting sharp or hard surfaces. Door latches were rudimentary, and side impacts often popped them open, ejecting unbelted occupants. Windshields and side windows used non-laminated glass, which could shatter into dangerous shards. The 1945 Plymouth Deluxe was everything a returning wartime family might want. Reliable, familiar, easy to service. But it was also a time capsule of pre-war design philosophies, completely out of step with what we now understand about vehicle safety. Its thin body, stiff suspension, rollover risk, and lack of safety engineering made it a hazardous vehicle when things went wrong. In an era with growing traffic and rising highway speeds, these flaws could turn even minor incidents into tragic ones. The story of the 1945 Plymouth Deluxe reminds us that mechanical dependability doesn't equal occupant safety. In post-war America, cars needed to be more than just rugged. They needed to protect lives, and the Deluxe simply wasn't engineered with that goal in mind. Number 3, the 1945 Cadillac Series 62 symbolized post-war American opulence. It was an aspirational vehicle, large, powerful, and unmistakably upscale. But under that gleaming metal and fine upholstery lurked serious safety shortcomings. As Cadillac rushed to meet pent-up demand using pre-war engineering, the Series 62 became a prime example of how luxury didn't equate to safety. This lecture explores the technical and structural hazards of the 1945 Cadillac Series 62, particularly focusing on braking deficiencies, excessive weight, and absent occupant protection. The 1945 Series 62 was essentially a carryover from 1942, reintroduced once civilian production resumed after World War II. Cadillac focused on comfort and prestige, not on updating the car's safety profile. Road speeds and traffic volumes began increasing post-war, but the Series 62 was still engineered for pre-war driving conditions. This created a dangerous mismatch between the car's bulk and performance capabilities. The Series 62 tipped the scales at nearly 4,400 pounds, a massive weight for the time. That weight wasn't paired with modern crash engineering or effective brakes, making stopping distances dangerously long. A large V8 engine up front and little to balance it out in the rear made handling nose-heavy and prone to understeer. In emergency maneuvers, the car was sluggish and difficult to bring back under control. Equipped with non-ventilated drum brakes, the Series 62 suffered from brake fade during extended or repeated stops. The sheer mass of the car overwhelmed its braking system, especially when loaded with passengers. Without modern dual-circuit hydraulic brakes, a single failure in the system could lead to complete brake loss. Braking effort was high, and pedal feel was vague, making it hard to modulate in panic stops. Like virtually all cars of its time, the 1945 Series 62 offered no seat belts, no airbags, and no padded surfaces. Occupants were surrounded by hard chrome trim, sharp dashboard edges, and a rigid steering column, all lethal in a crash. The cabin emphasized visual luxury with decorative elements rather than crash-worthy materials. In a frontal collision, unbelted passengers risked being impaled by the metal horn ring, dashboard knobs, or ejected entirely. The Cadillac used a body-on-frame layout with limited flexibility in crashes. This type of structure transferred impact forces directly to occupants rather than dissipating them. Despite its size, the car's roof structure and doors were thinly braced, offering poor protection in side impacts or rollovers. Heavy doors often burst open in accidents due to weak latching mechanisms. Cadillac tuned the Series 62 for plush ride quality, but this made it unstable at speed or on rough terrain. Excessive body roll compromised control in quick direction changes or evasive actions. Bias-ply tires with a narrow tread profile and tall sidewalls lacked grip, particularly on wet roads or gravel. Combined with vague steering, this made it easy to lose traction, especially under braking or cornering. The 1945 Cadillac Series 62 was undeniably impressive to look at and comfortable to ride in, but under its luxurious exterior lay a vehicle that was underbraked, overbuilt, and dangerously outdated in terms of safety. Its sheer weight, lack of occupant restraints, and poor braking made it one of the more hazardous luxury vehicles of its time, especially as traffic speeds and density increased in the post-war years. In 1945, Cadillac led with prestige, but not with safety. The Series 62 is a reminder that beauty and comfort do not guarantee survivability. For all its polish and power, it was ill-equipped for the realities of modern driving, even by the standards of the late 1940s. Number 2. The 1945 Dodto Custom emerged as the brand's top-tier model, positioned as a full-sized, comfortable, family-oriented sedan. Like many American cars rushed back into production after World War II, it reused pre-war engineering to meet pent-up consumer demand. But comfort came at the expense of driver control and safety, and the result was a car that was dangerously ill-equipped for modern roads. In today's lecture, we'll examine how the 1945 Dodto Custom, despite its luxurious look, was compromised by brake fade, vague steering, and floaty handling, all of which added up to a dangerous driving experience. Civilian auto production resumed slowly after the war. The 1945 Dodto Custom was mechanically almost identical to its 1942 counterpart, offering no significant upgrades in safety or performance. Post-war infrastructure was rapidly improving, and speeds were increasing. The Dodto's pre-war chassis and suspension simply weren't ready for the demands of emerging highways. The Dodto Custom weighed nearly 3,700 pounds, putting it among the heavier sedans in its price range. All that weight meant sluggish acceleration and long stopping distances, a bad combination for emergency situations. Dodto prioritized ride softness, but the result was a floaty sensation at speed. This led to delayed driver input response, especially during swerves or evasive maneuvers. Equipped with hydraulic drum brakes, the Dodto Custom initially offered decent stopping power. However, under heavy or prolonged braking, like descending hills or sudden repeated stops, the brakes suffered severe fade. Brake drums were enclosed and lacked ventilation, causing them to overheat quickly. Once hot, brake performance dropped dramatically, and recovery required cool-down time, not practical in emergency use. The steering box was imprecise, and road feedback was nearly non-existent. Drivers reported needing to constantly correct the wheel, especially on bumpy or uneven surfaces. In an emergency, such as avoiding another car, pedestrian, or object, the Dodto's steering was simply too vague and slow to trust. Combined with its heavy nose and wide turning circle, this made evasive actions difficult to execute effectively. Designed for ride comfort, the suspension allowed for excessive body roll and front-end dive under braking. This gave the car a disconnected, boat-like feel, terrifying in tight corners or sudden stops. Tall, narrow bias ply tires offered minimal grip, especially on wet roads or gravel. With so much weight on top, the tires would lose traction easily, and there was no traction control or limited slip differential to compensate. Like most 1940s vehicles, the Dodto Custom lacked any form of passive restraint. No crumple zones, no energy-absorbing materials, only rigid steel dashboards, chrome knobs, and a solid steering column. Door latches could fly open in a crash, and the roof provided minimal rollover protection. In a side impact or collision, the passenger compartment would deform, endangering all occupants. The 1945 Dodto Custom was a large, comfortable car for its time, but its strengths and ride quality were undermined by serious flaws in braking, handling, and steering response. It was a vehicle designed more for gliding along Main Street than dealing with high-speed or emergency driving situations. The Dodto Custom's charm and presence couldn't mask the fact that it was an outdated machine built for a world that was rapidly changing. For families that bought it in hopes of luxury, the lack of safety and control made it a risk behind the wheel, especially as speeds increased and roads modernized. Number 1. The 1945 Hudson Super 6 stands as one of the most paradoxical vehicles of its era. It introduced an innovative step-down design that improved handling and lowered the center of gravity, features rare in the immediate post-war years. Yet for all its forward-thinking engineering, the Super 6 suffered from weak brakes, poor crash resistance, and a complete lack of modern occupant protection. In this lecture, we will explore how the Hudson Super 6 of 1945 symbolized a dangerous imbalance. advanced architecture paired with dangerously outdated safety fundamentals. In 1945, Hudson restarted production after World War II by reintroducing its Super 6 model, a holdover from 1942 in many respects. The company promoted innovation and engineering progress, particularly its step-down chassis, but cut corners on safety due to cost, urgency, and the era's norms. In 1945, marketing emphasized comfort, reliability, and horsepower, not protection. Consumers prioritized luxury and availability, not crashworthiness. Hudson's signature innovation lowered the floor pan between the frame rails. This made the cabin feel lower and more stable, reducing rollover risk compared to taller sedans. While lowering the center of gravity was a meaningful advance, crash resistance remained poor. The steel side structure was thin, and the lack of side impact reinforcement meant occupants were still dangerously exposed. A lower seating position might reduce rollover fatalities, but in frontal or side impacts, the cabin crumpled easily. Like most cars of its era, the Super 6 used non-ventilated hydraulic drum brakes. In day-to-day traffic, this was acceptable, but under prolonged or emergency braking, the brakes overheated quickly and faded badly. Even at modest speeds, it took disturbingly long distances to bring the heavy Super 6 to a halt. Braking performance degraded significantly under load or with passengers on board. The Super 6 featured no crumple zones, energy absorption, or passenger protection geometry. A frontal crash often resulted in the engine being shoved into the cabin, and there were no reinforcements in the door panels. The all-steel dash, protruding knobs, and fixed steering column turned into lethal hazards during a collision. There were no padded surfaces, no seat belts, and nothing to prevent ejection or internal injury. Thanks to the low center of gravity, the Hudson handled better than most of its peers. The body roll was reduced, and it was less prone to tipping during turns. The manual worm and sector steering was slow and vague. In evasive situations, the car's heavy steering and unresponsive feel hindered reaction time. As post-war America began building faster highways and city traffic increased, the Hudson's safety limitations became more obvious. On a long downhill grade, brake fade turned into panic. A broadside collision on a city street crumpled the passenger compartment. High-speed maneuvering required a firm grip and guesswork, not driver confidence. The 1945 Hudson Super 6 deserves credit for pioneering a smarter platform layout with its step-down design. But its engineering brilliance stopped short of addressing driver and passenger safety. Weak brakes, crude crash dynamics, and zero occupant protection made it a liability wrapped in innovation. In hindsight, the Hudson Super 6 represents an important lesson in automotive history. Engineering innovation must go hand in hand with safety development. While Hudson moved the industry forward in chassis design, it also demonstrated what happens when you focus on one kind of progress and ignore the dangers that ride alongside.